For more information on the Kubrick series, visit us online at moviegeeksunited.net/Kubrick. And for more information on Matthew Modine's Full Metal Jacket experience, visit fullmetaljacketdiary.com. Over the course of 13 feature films, he examined a diverse range of topics and themes, from the glories and dangers of technology,
I'm afraid, Dad,
to the moral conflicts inherent in war.
Whose side are you on, son?
Our side, sir.
Don't you love your country?
Yes, sir.
How about getting with the program?
He investigated the duality of man with unblinking honesty and without judgment. With a fierce intelligence, he embraced the ambiguous, with a dense complexity that reveals deeper layers of truth with every viewing of his work.
You've always been the caretaker.
His films were of their time, ahead of their time, and timeless.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops.
This is the Kubrick series. By the time he was approached to star in Full Metal Jacket, Matthew Modine had already collaborated with some of our finest filmmakers, including Robert Altman, Alan Parker, and John Sayles. But Full Metal Jacket would prove to be the most intensive, invigorating, and challenging experience of his career. Mr. Modine kept a diary throughout the production of the film, and later he would share his entries with Kubrick fans the world over in a beautifully designed limited edition book titled Full Metal Jacket Diary. Appropriately encased in splendid metal and illustrated with a series of gorgeous photographs snapped by Mr. Modine himself from the set of the film, the diary is a must-own for Kubrick aficionados and any lover of great filmmaking. You can find out more about the diary at fullmetaljacketdiary.com. In this conversation, Mr. Modine discusses what he discovered about himself and his craft by working with Kubrick, and announces an exciting new project that honors the unique artistry of Kubrick and the legacy of this extraordinary film.
I was in Los Angeles at this restaurant with my friend David Alan Grier, and we were eating pancakes, and it happened to be in that restaurant where Woody Allen had thought he was putting the car in reverse, and he put it in drive and drove into the restaurant. And we were joking that we were happy that Woody Allen was in New York and there was no sign of Diane Keaton in the restaurant, because in movies, when a car drives into a restaurant, it's funny, and in real life, when somebody does that, people get crushed and killed. And my friend David Alan Grier and I happened to have been sitting in this seat talking about that when opposite me was another young actor named Val Kilmer, and Val was giving me these dirty looks and kind of mumbling to himself. And I asked David, I said, unless this guy has Tourette's, he's giving me the hairy eyeball. And David looked over his shoulder and he says, "Oh, that's Val Kilmer. He's a cool guy." And he got up and he went over and started talking to him. David Allen had worked with him, teaching him some songs for a movie that Val Kilmer had done called Top Secret. Mm-hmm. And so he called me over to introduce me to Val Kilmer. And I said, "Hey, how you doing? My name's Matthew." And he goes, "Yeah, I know who you are." He goes, "I'm sick of you, man." And at that particular moment in my career, I was on a fantastic run of movies. I'd done Harold Becker's Vision Quest. I did Mrs. Soulful, where I played Mel Gibson's brother with Diane Keaton. And then I had just finished Birdie, and Val Kilmer then said, and now you're doing Full Metal Jacket. And I knew that Kubrick was casting the film, but Kubrick was requiring that everyone send in a videotape audition, which at that time was very difficult because you had to have access to a big VHS camera or the money to be able to go into some kind of studio and put yourself on tape. And I just couldn't be bothered to do it, and hoped that, if Kubrick was interested, maybe he'd see one of these films that I had just completed. So long story short, I I ran out of the restaurant after I finished my pancakes and called up my manager and said that this guy had just told me that he heard I was doing Stanley Kubrick's new movie, and he said he didn't know anything about it, and I said, I don't either, so why don't we call Warner Brothers and get him to send Vision Quest to him, and then I'll call Alan Parker in London and get Alan Parker to send a piece of film, because Alan was editing Birdie at the time, over to Kubrick. And I went back to New York, and I guess it was probably a month later, I heard the mail slot open on my front door, and a script got slid through it, and it was from Stanley Kubrick asking me to read the script and consider being in his film.
Wow. I would think that as a young actor you had a lot of success and terrific collaborations prior to Full Metal Jacket. And you obviously love the art form. What role did Kubrick's films play in your life up to that point?
Well, my dad was a drive-in theater manager, and the Kubrick films weren't really the kind of movies I would have seen at my dad's drive-in. So they were films that you had to search out and find. I mean, watching 2001: A Space Odyssey at a drive-in movie theater would have been a miserable experience because of the sound and the entire art direction of the film, the photography of the film would have been lost at a drive-in movie. You know, drive-ins were for westerns, cowboy movies, and horror movies, and TNA, swinging stewardess kind of movies. So there were occasional art films that would make their way to and translate well into a drive-in, but Kubrick's films weren't those kind of movies that they didn't deserve to be played in a drive-in. They deserved to be seen in a movie theater. So I was certainly conscious of Stanley Kubrick and the reputation and the myth, the myth of Stanley Kubrick, but I wasn't an acolyte. So when that script came through the door and I started reading it, of course I was incredibly excited. First of all, just the fact that how did he find me? How did he find my address and have a script mailed to my house that didn't go through an agency? It wasn't mailed to me by my agent. It was arrived at my house through the mail slot. That just adds to his amazing aura of power.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe I read that 4 of your brothers and a sister actually served in the war.
My oldest brother, Mark Jr., he did. He went to Vietnam. My brother Michael and my brother Russell joined at the time, but didn't travel to Vietnam.
Okay.
But my sister Elizabeth, I think she wanted to be a nurse, and I'm not sure if she ever got. They were all in the Navy, by the way. I'm not sure that she ever got out of Maryland. If she ever spent time on a ship, her life was kind of a mystery to us, with the entire family. After she turned 18, I think she just really wanted to get out of town, and so she joined the Navy and disappeared. And we didn't see her till she was 30 years old. She just went off the radar. Yeah.
But how did that experience, because you grew up in a household that knew of war and the military form, how did that experience kind of inform your perception of that character in this film?
Well, I guess it was also my uncle Wilder who flew a B-17 in the Second World War, and I would later make a film called Memphis Belle, where I actually wore my uncle's dress uniform and played the pilot of a B-17. So that was a very special thing. And then my father was in the Merchant Marine, so there was always a family history of participating in conflicts overseas. So for this opportunity to work on this film on the heels of Streamers, which is a play written by David Rabe that was made into a film by Robert Altman, which was a huge film for my career. We won the Best Acting Award at the Venice Film Festival with that. And then Birdie, which was a Second World War film or Korean War film, I forget what it was in the book, that Alan Parker updated to Vietnam. And then now with Kubrick and this opportunity. So it's kind of a trilogy of Vietnam films for me. And I guess since I was a child with my brothers in the Navy, gone during the time of the war, the war can be something that's very abstract because it's not something that like the war in Iraq is something, I think, for a lot of young people, something very abstract. But when you have a family member that's participating in it, it changes the perception of the war. It becomes something that's very real. And having my brothers overseas, when I would come home from school and sit down and watch the evening news with Walter Cronkite, and him sort of giving the baseball scores of how many of theirs had been killed and how many of ours had been killed, and these strange names, Khe Sanh and Saigon, and they were such kind of mystical places that, and I really wanted to understand the war. And after having completed Full Metal Jacket, my feeling is the Vietnam War is something that none of us will ever understand. It's something that is beyond understanding and interpretation. And sadly, I think that there's just that we have a terrible love of war, and all too often we use force to solve problems rather than reason. Yeah. And just to bring this all back to Stanley Kubrick, I think that if you look at all of his films, from certainly Paths of Glory, 2001, and Full Metal Jacket, and spiced into each of his films is the idea that if we don't learn to solve our problems in peaceful, intelligent ways, it's going to bring the end of everything we struggle for as a culture and what we call humanity.
Mm-hmm. There was the way he chose to tell stories, and Full Metal Jacket included. There's a kind of an ambiguity to it, which isn't something that audiences are necessarily conditioned to respond to as well. I mean, he doesn't ingratiate himself to an audience. Mm-hmm. And yet, and I think that's why people miss the compassion that's present in his films too.
I'm glad you said that, because I think his films are wonderfully compassionate. What they do is hold the mirror up to society and show you all the wrinkles and pimples, and rather than creating it, shooting life through gauze and Vaseline, that he tells a story about who we are and what we are, and offers the opportunity for us to see that and try to understand that if we don't look for peaceful resolution to our problems, we create unbelievable agony in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that's apparent in all of his films. And this is one of the things that will shock people, is that contrary to that myth, that Stanley Kubrick was an unbelievably loving person, somebody who was incredibly generous, certainly to his family and his friends, but to other filmmakers. He was I meet young directors all the time that say that they got a call from Stanley Kubrick complimenting them on the work that they'd done and asking questions about what kind of camera, what kind of lenses they used, and why they, curious why they made choices that they made, and I think that includes, I believe, Darren Aronofsky, because it was one of the last directors I talked to Stanley about before he passed away. He thought Darren Aronofsky was a terrific filmmaker, all the way to my first director that I worked with, Robert Altman.
Tell me about. I understand that he did not talk about or go into the meaning of material, but what were your conversations with him like?
Well, I think that he was very curious about truth and what is truth, and how do we define what truth is. I guess the best example that I can find was, there was a day, and I wrote about this in my book, Full Metal Jacket Diary, It was part of my diary that I took on the responsibility of that I had no business taking on, which was the scheduling of the film, and that we, before the end of the first week, we were already a week behind, and by the end of the first month, we were still a month behind. And I felt that being the lead actor in his film, that I took the responsibility of that we're not moving forward because of something that I was doing, which was ridiculous because it had nothing to do with me. And I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know how to play this character that Stanley Kubrick was giving me an opportunity to play. And I knew it was a really important film. I knew this was a really difficult character, maybe the most difficult character I'd ever played. And I was wandering around in a field, and I saw Stanley driving across it in his Jeep, and I tried to hide in the grass so he wouldn't see me. And of course he did, and he drove across the field and drove up and said, "Hey, jump in, I'll give you a ride to the set." And I said, No, it's okay, I'll walk. And he could see that I was disturbed and upset, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, Stanley, I don't know how to play this role. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what I'm doing." And he shut the Jeep off, and he pulled on his beard, and he scratched his forehead, and he said, "Listen, I don't want you to play anything. I just want you to be yourself." And I said, "Yeah, sure, Stanley. Okay, yeah, I'll just be myself." And he said, "Jump in the Jeep. I'll give you a ride to set." I said, "No, it's okay. I'm gonna walk." And he drove off, and I wrote in my diary that I know the important part of that sentence was to be, and that not to play, but to be. And it's something that if you read the whole diary is a continuing theme throughout the diary of a young man. I was, in my early 20s, working with this arguable genius and learning to be. Mm-hmm. I'll use Lee Ermey as an example. Lee Ermey was hired to be the technical advisor on the film, and it was when he was auditioning the extras on the film, and he had Tim Colcheri, who becomes the helicopter. He's shooting the helicopter, the waist gunner, and the helicopter, saying, "Get some, get some." And I say, "How do you shoot women and children?" And he says, "Easy, you just don't lead them as much." That was the drill instructor. That's Tim Colcheri. He's a really nice man, a really wonderful actor. And Stanley wanted him to practice with the extras that were working on that were auditioning for the film. And he'd yell at him for a while, practice some lines that he was going to say as the drill instructor, and get tired, and his throat would hurt. And so he'd say, "I don't want to do it anymore." But still, we had 25 extras that still needed to be auditioned and put on tape for Stanley to look at, to decide who was going to be in the film. So Lee Ermey would then step in front of the camera and start to audition these kids. And Lee Ermey is Lee Ermey. He's not any different than what he is in the film, in life. And Stanley would look at the videotape and see Tim Colcheri, who was acting, playing the role, doing a good job. But then Lee Ermey would get in front of the camera, and he wasn't playing, he was. And that's why I say this is a constant theme in the diary, is that Stanley wasn't looking for something that's artificial. He's looking for something that is. And Lee Ermey wasn't acting. He was being the drill instructor. Yeah. And that's important. And when I think of someone like James Dean or Marlon Brando or Jack Nicholson or any Al Pacino, there are young people, and Stanley Kubrick, any great artist, Picasso, Matisse, that when you try to be somebody else, when you try to play something, when you try to act something, you often fail. And the genius of someone like Stanley Kubrick or any of those other artists that I just mentioned is that sometimes we are blessed to have confidence in who we are, and we be what we are. And that's what Stanley was trying to get at. He didn't want somebody to play something. He wanted them to be it.
And he had the luxury of time. which I would imagine was a great luxury for you as an actor too. Could you give me a sense of the process of discovery that took place from spending so much time on any given scene?
Well, I mean, for instance, he said that I get accused of doing so many takes, and I do a lot of takes because actors don't know their lines. And I was like, what do you mean? I know my lines. And it wasn't until I'd finished the film, I met a man named Marvin Minsky, who it turned out was somebody who was responsible for this expression, artificial intelligence. And Marvin Minsky was a friend of Stanley Kubrick's who had worked with him on 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was just one of those weird coincidences of life, of serendipity. And because I met Marvin Minsky, and I said, oh, my God, I loved your book. It called The Society of Mind. I said, it was such a great book. And I said that it was after reading the book, I understood something that Stanley Kubrick was talking about lines. He says he gets accused of doing a lot of takes because actors don't know their lines. And in your book, you talk about the process that a child goes through of learning to discover that the hand is part of the arm, which is part of the body, which is a part of the baby. That all of these, that a child reaches for something, sticks his finger in his eye, and that muscle memory of learning how to use your hand, how to use your arm to reach for a glass of water that the baby spills all over his face, that then learns to bring the cup of water to the face and drink without spilling it all down the front. These are all things that we have to learn. We have to teach ourselves how to use our hand and to be able to drink something, to get to the point where, as a more skilled person, you can pick up a cup of tea on a saucer and walk across the room and stub your toe on the furniture and tamp your hand in a way so that you don't spill the tea. And I said, that's what Stanley Kubrick was talking about. Knowing your lines is like to go through the process that a baby goes through of knocking the cup over, spilling the cup, to get to the point where you can walk across the room with a cup of tea and a saucer and not spill it. And that's when Marvin Minsky told me, he said, Stanley Kubrick and I were great friends. And I said, oh, of course you were. But that's what Stanley Kubrick was talking about, knowing your lines. You have to have them in your body so that you're not acting, but you're being. You're not thinking about what it is you're going to say. You're saying it. To get away from the whole artifice of acting, to get to a place that's something different. It's something much deeper, something that's inside of you and part of your subconscious.
There have been quite a few movies about war and the Vietnam conflict in particular. What do you think the legacy of Full Metal Jacket is?
Well, I know that there's a tremendous audience for the film, and it continues to find relevance in the world that we live in, where a lot of other war movies become something comical. They become something that's uninteresting. But this is the genius of Stanley Kubrick. I remember him telling a story about the Queen was going to go to the opera, and the Queen said, "Oh, what's on tonight?" And they said, La Traviata. And she said, "Oh, I've seen it." So, and that was kind of lost on me, what Stanley was trying to say. He was saying that when something's a great piece of music, it doesn't, you can listen to it over and over and over again. You can listen to Beethoven over and over and over again, because there's always going to be something about the subtlety of the music and the genius of the music that you're going to hear something new. And when you heard it when you're 16, it was something. When you hear it when you're 25, it's something quite different. Mm-hmm. And a film should be something like that, like a piece of art that continues to have relevance and capture your imagination. And I think you can say that with all of Stanley Kubrick's films, from the early, even The Killing, that you see the genius that's Stanley Kubrick, and the films continue to have a relevance and a mystical quality that makes them relevant. And Full Metal Jacket's legacy today, I think it's weird because the street fighting that we were doing in the city of Wei looks like the street fighting in the city of Kabul, or take your pick of which city in Afghanistan or Iraq. Stanley found a deeper truth with Full Metal Jacket that is fantastic, and I don't know how he accomplished that, but he did. For instance, if I use Lee Ermey, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, when Gunnery Sergeant Hartman gets shot in the latrine by Private Pyle, in another filmmaker's hands, the same script, not changing any word of dialogue, the audience might feel good. They might feel that guy was a bad guy and he deserved to be shot. And I've seen the film probably, 15 or 20 times with an audience, and I've never heard an audience not be horrified by what has happened, and not feel that Pyle, was right in killing him, that the Gunnery Sergeant Hartman deserved to be killed, because Stanley, even with everything that happens, Stanley makes you understand that all that drill instructor is trying to do is to teach those young people how to keep from getting killed, to be able to survive in a situation that they're being sent to fight in, And I think that's an incredible accomplishment.
I was talking about the legacy of Full Metal Jacket, and I understand that you've got a new project in the works that will continue that legacy on. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I had a diary that I kept while I was making the film. It was that little book that I had, and you see me writing in it quite often in the film. Once we're in Vietnam, and because we filmed Vietnam first, and then we went to boot camp, and the whole film was filmed in London, which is a surprise to a lot of people who didn't know that. So the diary that I kept, I thought I would publish photographs that I took on the set. I had an old Rolleiflex camera that my friend Joe Kelly had given to me. Because he saw that as I was getting ready to go to London to go meet and work with Stanley Kubrick, that I was starting to get a little bit nervous. So he gave me this old Rolleiflex camera, and he said, you should learn how to use it, teach yourself how to use it, learn the subtleties of this camera, and then when you get to London, bring it to Stanley and show it to him, and he'll be really impressed because of his photography background that you know how to use a Rolleiflex. So I taught myself how to use the camera, and when Stanley saw it, he told me, he said, "What are you doing with that old piece of junk?" But I fell in love with this camera, and I think for perhaps the first times in one of his films, he allowed an actor to take pictures on the set. So I took quite a few photographs with this beautiful camera, and I always wanted to do something with the prints. I gave prints to all the actors and Stanley while I was making the film, and then I always wanted to do something with them. So I spoke to a book publisher, and he said, these are beautiful. I'd love to make a book with you. He said, you're going to have to write a story about the experience, to go along with the photographs. And I said, well, I kept a diary. And he said, we'll transcribe it, and we'll see what we can pull from it. And the diary was a kind of an amazing journey about a young man going off to work with this incredible filmmaker, and all the insecurities that he feels, and the experiences that he has, and he obviously grows to love this director, and is frustrated by all of the things that are happening around him environmentally. That Chernobyl was happening, there was other films that were being offered that were being lost because, I was in England for almost 2 years. So the diary kind of follows the arc of this period of my life, and it's an amazing journey. It's kind of the Heart of Darkness kind of story. Mm-hmm. And so the book, when I published it, I wanted it to be something that Stanley Kubrick would think was beautiful and something that he would hold and say, this is fantastic. And unfortunately, Stanley passed away before the book came out, and I didn't get to share it with him. But I know that he would have loved the book. It's a metal book, and it's got serial numbers on it. I wanted it to be like a piece of art, So it was a limited edition book, and it sold out very quickly. And there were a lot of people that didn't get a chance to purchase it. And so what's really exciting now is with people purchasing books on iPads is this opportunity to create a book that is an app for an iPad that would give you the opportunity to experience the book in a completely different way. Using the photographs that I took on the set. I'll put in additional photographs that weren't in the book. The book is going to have a lot of really interesting audio effects and music. So it's going to be an interactive app for people to be able to listen to and experience the book in a completely different way. Some of the people that were involved with the making of the film are going to be involved with the making of the book, I should say the app, and it's really, really exciting.
It sounds exciting. I mean, I have the Full Metal Jacket Diary, and it's a beautiful package, and it's a feast for anyone that loves that film and loves the work of Kubrick. And hearing about your experiences in your photography is phenomenal.
What's really important to me is, because I have such a tremendous respect and love for Stanley Kubrick, that his standard of quality for the work that he did was something that was never compromised, and to tell a story about the experience of working with him on Full Metal Jacket, it has to be at a level of something that he would give his stamp of approval for. So that's my gold standard is Stanley Kubrick and his legacy, and that Stanley would say this is a really cool application for an iPad, for that experience of learning about his making movies.
And I could see where he would love the idea of what you're doing with it, because he was crazy about the latest technological advancements, and I heard he was a real connoisseur of gadgetry and that kind of thing. So I think that's perfect.
Yeah. And also the prints from the book I'm going to be able to sell those to people. So if there's I think everybody really loves one day I was helping the prop guy putting stuff back onto his truck, and I picked up Stanley Kubrick's director's chair. And as I was walking to help him put it into the truck, there was this big chunk of concrete out in a field. And so I stuck the chair on this chunk of concrete. And, of course, the chair was too big for the chunk of concrete. And I took a photograph of it. And while I thought it was kind of funny at the time, because Stanley's chair was too big for the concrete, in Stanley's passing, the chair has taken on a kind of it's taken on a kind of metaphor about that Stanley was too big for the world, his art, his voice, his creations, that it's a beautiful photograph. It's on the cover of the Michel Ciment book about Kubrick. If you're a big shot director and you want a big fancy photograph of Stanley Kubrick's chair, they'll be available on the FullMetalJacketDiary.com